Hey everybody, welcome to my world of contemporary batik painting, where I will shed light on how to create beautiful contemporary batiks on paper as well as fabric. In today's episode, I will run through some of the techniques and tips that I have picked up over the years regarding how to use wax pens with hot wax when creating a batik. Before I begin, I need to explain that there are many approaches to using hot wax as a resist on paper, wood and fabric. Batik fabric created for attire has a very different process to mine, as does the process used by tie-dyers. It is a technique that is specific to contemporary batik painting and does not reflect the culture or symbolism of any country. It is purely a method of creation. Now, even within the contemporary batik painting community, every artist will have their own specific way of working, which has evolved over time and takes into account the climate, the materials available, as well as the style of the artist. So although I'll be sharing with you my techniques and hacks, you will need to modify these to fit your own particular needs. But if you're a beginner, these techniques should get you creating beautiful paintings relatively quickly. So with all that said, let's get into the video. The first thing I do every day as I enter my studio is switch on my wax pot. I always check that the temperature is slightly below the temperature that I want as it heats up. This just stops the wax from overheating. If it's a warm day, or as I did recently, accidentally up the temperature gauge as I was clearing up the night before, and the next day the wax began to give out visible fumes. Not something you want, trust me. So then, as my wax is heating up, I open the windows to provide good ventilation and set up my workspace. I actually timed my wax pot today, and it took around 3 minutes for the wax to melt and reach a good temperature. I will do later projects using alternative heating methods, and I will remember to time those too, but trust me, this wonderful wax pot is the fastest and most efficient. For today's tutorial, you will need a plain piece of watercolour paper. This one is around 180 GSM, a pencil, your wax pens, and some paper towel or rag, as well as your wax pot for heating up your wax in. When starting out, you don't need to use your best paints and paper, as becoming skillful in this technique does take a little time, and so most of what you'll do to start with will just be for practice. However, once you've mastered batik painting, whether it be on paper or on fabric, you can then use higher grade paints, paper and fabrics. But for now, as you learn, you can be far more economical in your choice of materials. The first thing you will need to get used to is how to hold a wax pen. Now these days you can buy wax pens that have been angled to make holding them easier. However, by holding the wax pens like a pencil, it actually restricts the movement of your hand and can make long lines, for instance, hard to do. So traditionally wax pens are straight or only slightly angled, and they are held very differently to a pencil. This is because the wax cup needs to be level as it contains a hot liquid, and when using a hot wax pen, your arm cannot connect with the surface that you're working on, well, not heavily anyway. In small pieces this isn't so much of a requirement, but when creating a large fabric batik on a frame, you cannot rest your hand anywhere, so it's good to get used to this technique now. In batik, the pen is held by placing the end of the handle in the palm of your hand, with your fingers holding the handle nearer to the tip, but never touching it, as it's hot. But it may be easier for me just to show you how I work with my wax pens. Once the wax is heated up and in a liquid form, I add my wax pens to the pot to charge. That means to heat up the metal cup to the temperature of the wax. Then I pick up my pen, tip out a little of the hot wax from the cup and place the hot end in a piece of paper towel. I then clean off any wax that is on the handle and cup, and I check my wax on a spare piece of paper, the same as the paper that I'm using. And then I take a few moments to look at where I want to begin my line and what shape I'm going to make. When I'm ready, I remove the pen from the paper towel and place it onto the watercolour paper whilst moving it in the direction of the line at the same time. Whilst moving the pen to create the line, I make sure that I maintain a constant speed and pressure on the paper. And then, when I've finished my line, I remove it from the paper and back onto my towel in one swift but steady movement. Both speed and pressure will affect the line that I create, and the hardest part of this technique is to begin the line correctly, as putting the spout onto the paper and then creating the line or shape once you're ready doesn't really work. And this is what you'll get if that's the way that you're drawing your shapes and lines. If you hesitate when beginning your wax line or slow down at the end, you will get an uneven line. So this way of working is a little different to what you're probably used to. By cupping the end of the handle in the palm of your hand, you can use your fingers and thumb to move the pen whilst making sure that your handle stays parallel to the surface. One of the biggest skills to master is that of keeping the speed of your motion constant from the beginning to the end of a line. To practice, try creating lines, making them as even as possible, and then draw some shapes and squiggles on your paper and practice following the line again at a constant speed. The next thing that you will need to consider is the temperature of your wax. Now, if I'm using a janting with a relatively wide spout, I'll keep my wax at a slightly lower temperature than when I'm using a fine kisker. Each tool will have its own ideal temperature of the wax, but if you're using all fine spouts, for instance, the wax can be at the same temperature for all. You will find that if you're working with a janting, you should lower the temperature, and if you're working with a fine kisker or wax pen like these, then you'll need to increase the temperature of your wax a little. There are other factors that also need to be taken into consideration. If the room that you're working in is very cold, you will need to increase the temperature of your wax slightly and expect it to cool down more quickly. Also bear in mind that your paper or fabric will also be cold. You may have noticed that I tend to work off a light box, which I put on the solid slate surface that I have here. This surface is very useful when working on a frame, but as I'm working off a flat surface when working with paper, the slate is just a little bit too cold. Of course, I can use anything to isolate the paper from the cold stone, but I find a light box works for me, especially when I need to check my wax. That is, the quality of the lines that I've created, as sometimes they can be hard to see. Obviously, if you're working in a warm room, your wax will heat up a little quicker and maintain a good working temperature for longer. If you feel out of control when applying your wax, or you have to move too quickly because the rate of the wax is flowing too quickly out of your wax pen, then turn down your heat source and allow the pens to cool slightly. Once you become more experienced, you can just hold the pen and blow on it until the correct temperature is reached. But this is a skill that only comes with practice and experience. So for now, concentrate on getting your wax to the correct temperature for you and your environment. If you're finding that your wax isn't flowing well, or the wax lines appear to be sitting on the surface of your paper, then increase the temperature of your wax a little and try again. And finally, the longer your wax pen is away from the wax pot, the cooler it will become, so you'll need to recharge your pen quite often. The final thing that you need to consider when finding the right temperature for your wax is the thickness and structure of the paper or fabric being used. Handmade papers will behave very differently to a standard smooth watercolour paper, and the thickness of the paper or fabric is also a factor, as to create strong, clean lines and shapes, the wax needs to soak fully into the material and provide a wax seal to the back of the paper as well as the front. Let me show you what a well-executed wax line looks like. The wax's temperature and the speed at which I drew the line have created an environment that the wax has made the line constant in its thickness and penetration. A wax that is too cool will hardly soak into your paper at all, and as you build up your image, may even disappear completely. Wax that's too hot will soak right the way through your paper or fabric, but you will have a thicker line than you actually want, and the edges won't be quite so defined. One easy way to check how good your lines and shapes are is by simply turning your paper over and looking at the back. Can you see all the lines with no breaks? If you can, then good job. But if you can't, then either turn up your wax just a little, or better still, slow down when drawing the line, and this should solve the problem. In a later video, I will go through a tip regarding how you can improve your shapes and lines, but for now, just play around with your temperature and speed of drawing until you find a formula that works for you. And one final tip, if you have trouble keeping your hand from pressing down hard on the surface while drawing, either take the weight of your upper body on your other hand, slightly tilt the paper, but not too much. Remember, the wax hits the surface as a liquid, or allow your hand to rest on the surface. But as you become more confident, try drawing without the surface for support. But don't worry if you can't do this. There are plenty of batik paintings that you can do. You just may find it difficult to do very large batik paintings on fabric. Well, that brings me to the end of this lesson on how to use a hot wax pen. I hope you found it informative, and if you have any questions regarding batik painting, please feel free to leave them in the comments for this video, and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. Thank you for watching, and if you have friends who are interested in batik painting, please let them know about my channel, and hopefully we can build a dynamic and creative community of like-minded people. Again, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you in my next video.